Here we go, week 7, chapter 6. Introduction to Sociology, Social Stratification, Canadian and Global Perspectives. When you look at the textbook, this chapter begins with several stories about how movies have regularly portrayed inequality and the unfairness of inequality in movies based in some way on shipwrecks. So it refers to Robinson Crusoe and Swept Away and Titanic. And of course, with Robinson Crusoe, there's been several versions of that made. I'm going to throw another one into the list, which is actually a comedy, which I remember seeing when I was younger. It's a movie with Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell called Overboard that came out in '87. And in this, Goldie Hawn is kind of like your typical spoiled rich woman on her yacht, whereas Kurt Russell's character has been hired to do some work on her yacht. I think he was hired to put in a closet. She treats him totally horribly because from her perspective, he's completely beneath her. Later that night, she falls overboard. She develops amnesia. The worker she is treated so badly sees her on the news and decides to collect her from the hospital and tell her she's married to him to get her to look after his house and her kids. So it's payback. Now, the differences between their two worlds are very apparent. How hard he works for relatively little return compared to her rich life where she does pretty much nothing and has everything she could possibly want. So her life circumstances and his are extraordinarily different from each other. In the end, she regains her memory and they decide to stay together in spite of their class differences. Kind of the same situation as in the Titanic. When you see the Titanic, the viewer is sure that lower working class Jack and upper class Rose will live in a happy life together, and an iceberg gets in the way and changes that. So in both of these examples, although extreme class differences exist, and they seem to act as like an insurmountable barrier to the love of the main characters, because of their love, this barrier of social stratification and economic inequality crumble. Now, looking at this, if you look at the real Titanic, when you look at the first, second, and third class passengers here, these are not survivors. These are people who boarded the Titanic to begin with. But then when you look at the survivors themselves, which class of ticket they held, and how many of them there are. This table is in your textbook. So first class, of course, was the most expensive ticket, and they were given preferential treatment throughout the voyage. They were the well-off upper and middle classes, including a few pretty well-known millionaires at the time, such as Benjamin Guggenheim and John Jacob Astor and Isidore Straus and his wife. If you've seen the movie Titanic, Benjamin Guggenheim, that character is the one that's sitting in his tuxedo and top hat watching the water rush in. And that's actually based on fact. He did actually get dressed in his tux with his valet, and the two of them sat there by the grand staircase, drinking brandy and smoking cigars, feeling that a true gentleman would never leave the ship before women and children, even though they knew this meant certain death. And Guggenheim's body was never found. Isidore and Ida Straus, he was the co-owner of Macy's department store in New York City. She could have gone on to a lifeboat, but flat out refused to board it without her husband. And they were last seen on deck, sitting, holding hands, when a large wave swept them overboard. And while his body was later found unidentified, hers never was. And then John Jacob Astor is another well-known American millionaire, and his body was never identified either. So these people chose to go down with the ship because, according to them, that was what a gentleman did. He would have been disgraced to take a seat in a lifeboat. Although, as one of the upper class, first class passengers, they could have absolutely done so. Since even when the Titanic was sinking, first class passengers were given first access to the lifeboats, and the rest were left largely to fend for themselves. Because the upper class had more economic power, they also had more social power. This is social stratification, how a society is organized in layers of strata. Now, I wanted to think term wealth means. What does it mean to be wealthy? Some people automatically think wealth can be defined by what a person owns. Whoever owns the biggest stuff or whoever owns the most stuff. But that's not entirely accurate, because wealth is not simply what you do or do not own. It is your assets minus your liabilities. So you may own a house, but how much is left on the mortgage and what's your interest rate? You may technically own a car, but how much is left on the loan? These days, students have to keep their student loans in mind a lot more than at any other point in history. However much you owe for a student loan is part of your liabilities, and I understand that. I owed just under $50,000 when I graduated. The fact is, having wealth can in many ways provide you or anybody a feeling of security. I feel like for some kind of, financing firm. They're not on TV anymore, but there used to be these Freedom 55 commercials that were on all the time. But it's true. And conversely, a lack of wealth can create a feeling, understandably so, of instability, of insecurity, a feeling of worry, and a feeling of what if, what if, what if. Now, this doesn't mean everybody feels the need to be really wealthy in order to have a feeling of financial security, because every person might have a different idea of what it means to be financially secure. So everybody's exact definition of what financial security is going to differ depending on their age, on what stage of life they're in, on what their previous experiences have been as individuals and in their families of origin with money. So if somebody grew up in a really poor home, living paycheck to paycheck, they're probably going to have a level of wealth in mind when they think of financial security. They might be content with a small home with a yard. They might not be concerned about what particular neighborhood that house is in. They might not be concerned about traveling or vehicles or recreational vehicles like an RV or a boat or a motorcycle. So somebody whose family of origin comes from a higher socioeconomic status will probably have higher expectations of what financial security would entail. And I want to be clear here. I'm not saying that somebody from a lower socioeconomic status has lower expectations in a negative way, in an insulting way. I'm saying that because of their previous experience, they simply have a different idea regarding what makes them feel financially secure. For some people, financial security to them means having a home paid off by the time they retire, or having an amount of money in the bank, or forecasting ahead to estimate how much money they want to have at retirement and planning and investing for that. For some people, it isn't just financial security in the manner I've just described, but also being able to have certain things or do certain things. And that creates a feeling of security for themselves. So for some people, it's important to have the money to travel every single winter, to be able to pay for their children's education, or to be able to purchase a new car every 3 to 5 years. So what I consider important to feel financially secure, not necessarily rich, but financially secure, is not necessarily the same as what you need to feel the same way, or your parents or your grandparents who likely lived through the Great Depression. And because of that experience, they're not going to have expectations that are as high as yours. And what I a valid way to demonstrate my financial security might be different than what you considered a valid way to do the same. So as an example, for some people, even if they have to go into debt to do these things, they are important to them. So they don't mind taking out a loan for an RV or a camper or a new car, or for a bigger house they want, but it's not truly a need. So this term of financial security is very, very vague. It's not specific at all. And it's also going to vary according to what your current socioeconomic status is. So for me, making $100,000 a year, I'd be pretty happy with that. I wouldn't complain about that at all. But I don't make that, so that's probably why I'd be very happy with it. But for somebody who typically makes $500,000 a year, to have their income drop to $100,000 a year, they would probably not be happy with that. They'd consider it a real step down and something to cause them a lot of concern. So this idea of financial security is relative, dependent on several factors, and what the term wealth means is also relative. In the Sociology of the Movies box, in the text, it describes a documentary called The Queen of Versailles. And because it's in the textbook, I watched it. I had never seen it before. Used to be on Netflix. It's not anymore, but it is available on YouTube in full, and it's very, very good quality, so there's no streaming issues or anything. And The Queen of Versailles provides a really good example of the fact that wealth is relative, and also that what it means to have a hard time with money is relative. It very effectively demonstrates that somebody who is accustomed to an enormous amount of wealth, somebody who is used to excess in every part of their life, as depicted in the film, who then has to adjust to less wealth, is still pretty wealthy compared to the vast majority of people, me included. However, for them, they feel like they're no longer financially secure. So the husband in the film clearly becomes more and more stressed out as his businesses encounter financial problems. So everybody is expected to cut back their spending, and he tells them that. But the wife's idea of cutting back is so far from what most of us would consider cutting back. You're just kind of staring at the screen going, really? So she goes to Walmart and fills up 3 to 4 carts. And instead of including buying a few new bikes when their garage is full of them, she fills 2 SUVs with everything she buys at Walmart. She continues to go to this specialty spa dermatologist to have her skin treatments done. She continues to have a Christmas party. She still has a maid and a nanny. So her idea of cutting back is my idea of living extravagantly. And in contrast to this in the film are the 2 maids. Well, one's a maid and one's a nanny. One of which is from another country who has not seen her own child in 10 years because she's working in the United States to be able to send as much money home as possible. And of course, you know, the nanny and the maid have very small rooms. And what this is a picture of is that the one of them even uses the children's old playhouse as a kind of relaxation space for herself. And to her, it's wonderful. She's very grateful that the mother and the family has allowed her to do this. So if you think about what it means to be suffering financially, does it mean that you can't pay basic bills? So you can't pay your rent or you can't pay your mortgage? Or does suffering financially mean you don't have enough food to eat? Or does it mean that you make major sacrifices for the sake of having work, like being away from your family, such as the maid in the film? Or does suffering financially mean that your kids can no longer attend private school, so they have to get into the public school system, like in the film? Having said that, I don't think anybody would argue with the statement in the text that wealth translates into power in various ways. Money equals power. The text, for example, specifically refers to the ability to make large campaign contributions, which would then provide you with political influence. This could occur at the local, municipal level, provincial level, or perhaps federally. Let's say I own an oil company and I want to build a pipeline that cuts through a piece of land that locals do not want disturbed. I donate a lot of money to a political candidate that has assured me that they support development of the pipeline, and I also encourage others associated with me and my company to do the same. Then the person that I have donated to wins, and when it comes time to vote either for or against construction, they vote to build the pipeline. So this is kind of like a stereotypical Hollywood movie type example that easily comes to mind. And I know it's an overly simplistic example. But wealth does translate into power, not just political power. Wealth can provide you power in regards to healthcare. It can affect healthcare in small ways on a daily basis that seem inconsequential. Being able to buy the best quality of groceries, organic, free range, grain fed, preservative free, anything else you want to throw in there. It can improve healthcare in practical ways, such as being able to pay for physiotherapy or occupational therapy or private speech pathology. The waiting list for speech services at the local school board is so long, your kid wouldn't be able to access it for a year or more. Wealth provides power, or should I say wealth provides you control over your life in terms of good dental care, braces, that kind of thing. We have a tendency to think that if a job has medical benefits, then that job is a good job. But even when somebody has benefits, which become more and more important as you get older, they usually cover only a portion of something, or there's usually a limit on them. So they'll cover a portion of dental expenses, a portion of glasses, up to 6 physiotherapy appointments in a given year, and you can't bank them and save them up year to year. So that may sound like a great package, but when you really need it, when you really need these services, it's not. 6 physio or 6 occupational therapy appointments or 6 speech pathology appointments is not good. It's actually barely enough to be useful at all. Wealth can also improve your and your family's mental health by providing more access to leisure activities, more access to time off and vacations, the money to do more when you do have time off. It can provide better access to counselors or therapists or psychiatrists. And all of this usually decreases a person's stress overall. So it really is accurate to say that a person that has wealth, not necessarily rich, but even a certain degree of wealth, is likely to live a longer life, a healthier life, both physically and mentally. This is one way that wealth does contribute to patterns of social inequality.